Hello, Ken Spriggs here with part 3 of my Revell Mandalorian N1 Starfighter build. This video I'm working on the display base, the diorama, the desert that the ship will be mounted on to display it. And quite a lot of work into it. I wanted to get some really realistic looking rock for the desert base, flying over a big rock embankment on Tatooine. So let's go ahead and take a look. All right, so I'm starting on the diorama base because I have to figure out the positioning of the ship, because the bottom hull, I have to fashion up the connector for the brass tube that's going to go down into the base to light the ship for the batteries. So I started with this square wooden part from Hobby Lobby. It's hollow underneath, so I'll show you here that in a little bit. So I can drill a hole through it, run down the brass tube, and then have the batteries underneath for easy access. So what I want to try to do is, in the end, I don't want the ship permanently mounted because it's long and spindly and has a lot of parts. So I want to have it removable. And what I can do is, using a brass tube big enough, I can have one of the disconnect wiring from Evan Designs that will come out of the bottom of the ship and then just connect into the other side of it going down through the tube. And then I can just remove the ship and replug it in when I need to. And then the base itself won't be all that heavy. Well, I mean, it'll have some little bit of heft to it, but once I get everything all done, it'll be easy to get underneath it. So I started with some foam, and I used my small foam wire cutter, and I cut out some different shapes, and I wanted to do some layers. As you can see, it looks rough, of course, because in the end it's going to be covered with other materials, probably like air drying clay and that sort of thing. And I'm trying to get an idea of how the ship will be set up. So I put the back spine on because that's going to obviously affect the overall length of it. So I'm kind of thinking of something sort of like this, maybe a little higher, as though it's flying over this rock formation. It's going to be bigger than the base, of course, because it's an 18-inch model. I don't want some really unwieldy base. This alone is pretty big. So what I'll end up doing is, the way it kind of looks is I'll probably be able to take the tube right down through here. So I don't have to worry about taking it through this terrain as of yet. I can go ahead and get this all glued down, probably just hot glue it, and hot glue it all together and onto the wood. I'll think about that. I might not do hot glue. I kind of prefer Aleene's foam and felt glue, which I've used many a times, which works well on foam, of course, and felt and wood, and get it glued onto there nice and solid. I don't want it coming off, and I'm not a huge fan of hot glue, so we'll see. I'll play with that, but I can start getting some of these glued together. This will be sort of the rough shape of the rock formation, and then I can use the smaller hot wire tools to cut out little bits and things of that nature, and do some carving into it before I put on the probably an air dry clay is what I'm going to go with. So I'm kind of thinking, first I was going to do it like from this direction with the flat side facing you. Then I thought I'd rather do it this way, give a little more character. So like a diamond shape, but have the rocks kind of moving in that general direction, which is what it's doing. A little bit of a cave area here maybe that I'll fill in, obviously, with other stuff. Maybe something big on top of here, like some big rocks or some larger boulder kind of things. So I'm going to give it a lot more character once I get all the basic shape to it. So this is a good start. I'll probably go ahead and get these all glued together and put onto the wood and let that set up overnight so I can get a nice solid base to work with. All right, so I changed my mind. I went ahead and did use the hot glue, but I only used it to glue these pieces together and this back piece. So this back piece is 2 parts. And this is going to be more contoured and rounded out with some air dry clay. This is going to go in the back, and this is all one piece. So that's holding it together solidly enough for me to go ahead and get it glued down onto the base. So it's going to go across diagonally like this. Let me go back some. And there's going to be some space between the two. What I'm going to do is glue this piece down to the wood with some Aleene's felt and foam glue, or wood. Also works on wood. And that'll give it a more solid base for this big chunk. So I'm going to get that glued down, let it harden overnight. This one I'm going to leave separate because what I'll have to try to do is, it's a narrow little gap in between it. I want to be able to get some of the air dry clay that I'm going to use around this and do it on the surface. I'm only going to do it on the top of the surface. The outer rounded part I'm just going to paint black. Then once this is on and, you know, I've started doing the clay on it, I can then do some clay on this before I glue it down, so I'm not having to work in that narrow spot. But I'll kind of work that out. And then I'll be adding some rock detail onto this. And then obviously some other scenic material, sand and rock and that sort of thing. So, okay. All right, so I've glued down this big chunk of foam onto the wood base. I'm applying some rocks on here. I'll show you those in a moment. So let me show you underneath. So here's the hollow underneath of the wood frame. So when I when I drill through a hole for the brass tube, the wiring will be able to come down through and I'll be able to house the battery underneath of it. So I talked about using some air dry clay, some other scenic materials, and I'll probably still use that to some extent. But what I've decided to do to get a really realistic looking rock face on this, instead of trying to carve it into the foam, is I used this rubber mold that's designed to make outcroppings, as it says. It's made for model railroad rocks. The idea is that you generally use plaster. You pour it into this, let it harden, take it out, apply them onto the model railroad, and then paint it. But instead, I used some Sculpey air dry clay. I'm sorry, not air dry, oven bake clay. So you just mold it like normal clay. You put it into the mold, and then I pull it out and I bake it in the oven 15 minutes, and it comes out as a nice hard rock. Very nice. So I made several of these. I had this beige color rock. I also made some with the white. Here's a bunch of pieces. Some of them I pressed in for the entire rock. Some of it I just pressed into like an edge of it to get a smaller, thinner rock. Because what I'm doing now is I'm going through and I'm using a hot glue gun. And I'm gluing on these rock pieces onto the foam to give it a more realistic rock look. As you can see right there. Then what I'll do is go back with the air dry clay, press it in between it, and sculpt that in to meld the rocks together. But I'll get a nice realistic looking, you know, pile of rocks that are kind of extruding up through the ground. And what I'll do as well, of course, is I'll have ones coming up lengthways this way and so on, and have some things on top. And I'll do the same thing on the one that goes in the back. In addition to using the air dry clay and putting some texture in that, and also some scenic material like sand and rocks and things like that to give it a more realistic look. I might end up having a little bit of rocks down in this area too, and obviously sand on the bottom. I'm not going to do anything on the edge. I'm just going to probably paint that black once I get everything else done with the rocks. So, okay. So I'm going to go ahead and finish gluing these on, I'll probably have to get some more Sculpey and make some more rocks in the oven in order to get all of this covered up to make it look like a realistic mound of various rock structures. So, okay. All right, so I glued on quite a bit in this section of the rocks. And it doesn't matter that they're different colors. It's all going to be painted. And I still have to go back in. Once I'm all done, I'm going to use air dry clay in these little gaps to fill that in, add some texture to it to make it look like the rocks are, you know, together kind of a thing. And I'll be using other scenic material like plants and a little bit of greenery, some rocks and other things, and sand. And it'll be painted, of course, and weathered. So I went out and I got some more molds from my local hobby shop. Really cool hobby shop. It's called Toys Forever. They're really good because they sell a lot of different things from auto railroads and models, and they do RC cars and things. But also, too, they'll order in things. So he was low on these and he ordered a bunch of them in. So I got quite a bit more. So I've already used 3 of them. This one I really like, which is Rock Face. It's very flat and it creates like that strata rock, like what I'm going for. I also got these other larger rocks and then these really deeper rocks called embankments. And what is this? Surface rocks. There we go. And I went ahead and made several and got them baked up. So the rock face, instead of doing one whole big piece, I made a big piece from it, but then I cut it before I baked it. So I could line them up going up vertically like these. And I made a few other ones and some smaller pieces. Some of these bigger, thicker rocks. I also have some on this tray. I just put it on an oven pan on some foil and bake it 15 minutes, and it comes out really well. I also showed a picture. I went to get some more Sculpey, and I found this large box, normally $40, almost 4 pounds, 3.75 pounds of Sculpey. Not quite sure the difference between original Sculpey and Super Sculpey and Primo Sculpey, but they all work the same to me. Oven baked clay. But they had it on sale at Hobby Lobby, 40% off. So I got it for like $24. Very nice. Nice big box of it that'll last me because I'm using quite a bit of it, obviously, to cover this whole surface. I'm not sure what I'm going to do in the back. I don't want to waste a lot of this on that back surface, and it is fairly flat. I could flatten it out more and just put something over that. You're not really going to see it so much. We'll see when we get to it. But let me go ahead and I'm going to start working on getting these longer sections glued onto these surfaces, make it a little easier to add on. Pardon the noise, but my cat's playing in some paper I have laid out on the floor for her. And then some bigger rocks as well. I'm thinking of maybe having these down on the surface of this, which is also going to have like an air dry clay surface and some sand, that kind of thing. So, okay. All right, so here are those pieces glued on. And I did a little bit of sanding along the edges to make them fit a little better with my Dremel, with a sanding wheel. But they came out pretty well. One of them, while it was still the clay part, I had kind of curved it along this piece that's jutting out a bit and then baked it. So it kind of kept that shape somewhat. And then the cool thing is, since I'm using hot glue, when I put this on, it tends to soften it up a bit so I can press it in place. So what I can do is put some glue on this side of it, press it down, pull it away a little bit, put some more glue on this side, press it in, and curve it around that edge. So you can see I ended up with some definite different sections of rock that are coming down, which I think are pretty cool. Put a couple of pieces along the edge there. And they don't have to be perfect. So any of the little gaps here, I'm going to use the air dry clay that I'm going to put in between it, and that's going to be along this surface as well to give it an uneven surface. And I'm also going to use scenic rock and sand and other materials. I just wanted to have a realistic looking rock that I can paint and then go back and do some dry brushing on it to bring out a lot of that detail to make it look like realistic rock, which I think is pretty cool. All right, so I got most of the face done. I need to work some more on this end here, the top, of course. This side over here, actually, I've done a little bit over there. Let me pull this over. Yeah, I got that pretty much done on this side. Still some gaps. And what I can do too is I can take some of these rocks and I can I can break them or cut them up a bit with my sprue cutters and just fill in that little gap right there. Do that. The back is pretty flat. What I'll probably end up doing with the back, since you're really not going to see it, is I'll make big sections of this and just kind of put a section here, maybe flip it and put it over here, just so there's something there, but it's not really something you're going to see. Plus, in addition, I have this other section, which is back here, sticking out. So I'll have to put some of that rock face on this as well and get this all done before I glue it down onto the wood. And then put down the air dry clay. So one other thing I did was I drilled down through the styrene and I put in this brass tube so I can run the wiring down through the base into the battery pack that's going to be underneath. So let me show you how that's going to work. All right, so I finalized the connector for the ship onto the brass tube that goes down through the foam into the base. And I wanted to be able to remove the ship, so I played with a couple of ideas. And obviously the wiring is going to go down into the base where I'll have the battery. So let me kind of show you here. Lift this up. So underneath it's hollow, and there's the brass tube coming out. So I'll run the wires out of that. I'll have the battery pack with probably some Velcro, or I might just glue it underneath here. Plenty of room, and then that way I can just remove the batteries from the base without too much of a problem. But the key thing is I want to be able to remove the ship from the base so that I can transport it. Because obviously this is the bottom of the ship and it's going to be glued onto the ship itself with all the wiring, and then there's going to be wiring going down through. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use a disconnect from Evan Designs, which is two thin wires that have a little a male and a female prongs that click together and they make a connection. So what I'll do is I'll have one end going down into the tube. It'll be glued in place so it's sticking out of the top. The other one I'll have loose up in here, and then I'll be able to plug it in. So I'll play with that later. So anyway, I tried a couple of ideas. Initially, I had glued several pieces of thick styrene together, and I just had the brass tube coming up and meeting it. And it had just a little bit of meat to get up in there, and it just wasn't really solid. It wasn't really supporting the ship very well. So I decided to go with a different route, and I had a piece of aluminum tube. Take this off. Right here, which is just the right size to be over top of the brass tube. It fits over there snugly. So I put that on there, but then when I was having a problem with the ship rotating around and spinning on it, So I took my Dremel and I notched out a little section of the brass tube on the end. It's not pretty, but it's a nice solid little piece there. And then in the aluminum tube, I have this piece of styrene that I curved a bit, and I glued it in place with some super glue. And then I put some 5-minute epoxy over the whole thing. So what happens is this little keyed part fits right down into that notch, and so it keeps it from moving. It has a little bit of play, but not very much. I don't want to, obviously would not want to play with it too much and move it around, because it could end up breaking that piece of plastic off. Sorry, I'm trying to get this with one hand. There we go. And so what happens is when I stick it on in the right orientation, that little plastic piece goes down into that notch. And ultimately, the ship is diagonal. So the base is going to be displayed this way, sort of in a diamond pattern, and the ship is diagonal. So when you're looking at it, obviously from this angle, you're going to see the front of the ship, you're going to see the whole profile of the ship. And it's slightly angled, facing down, so that the ship itself is kind of in an action pose where it's swooping over top of these rocks. So let me go ahead and put the rest of the ship on top of this and show you how that's going to look. All right, there we go. So pretty cool. So if you're looking at it straight on, the ship is sort of angled this way a little bit. So you get a nice view of the top. So this one here is a little lower than the back engine. And then you can get a nice view of the cockpit with Mando inside of it. And, you know, these will be lit up, of course. You'll be able to see very easily the back engine, which is lit up. And really, if you looked underneath, you'd be able to see the underneath part of the ship as well. But that's not really the main thing you're looking for. Let me kind of turn that towards the front and show you how that's going to look from the front. There you go. So you can kind of see from the front how it's certainly angled to the right if you were looking at the cockpit from the pilot's perspective. It's also kind of coming down a bit, like it's swooping down over this whole rock structure. And I kept it up high enough so it wouldn't be really close to any of these high outcroppings of rocks. And I'll certainly, you know, fill in some material, rock material around this post. I'll paint it the sand colors, then I'll paint the rest of it, so it won't be quite as obvious when you're looking at it. But it'll be pretty cool. And obviously this ship is way larger than the base, so it's going to be sticking over on it, but it's going to look pretty cool. So, all right. One other thing I wanted to point out that I had corrected is, for some reason, and I showed this in the unboxing review of the kit, they had the Revell information printed on the bottom, the outside of the ship. Why on earth wouldn't you put it on the inside where nobody's going to see it? It was just these raised letters with Revell and, you know, the copyright and all that stuff. Really ridiculous. I don't know why. But I sanded all that off with several different grits of sandpaper to get a smooth finish on the bottom. You're not really going to see it, but still, it's crazy. So at this point, I'm ready to remove the engine part down below. This isn't glued on yet. And go ahead and get this painted. So I want to paint the bottom with the aluminum that I did on the top and do the speckles with the oily steel. Get this all painted. I'm going to paint this part also with the gunmetal like I did on the top as well to give it some little bit of a different metallic look. In the end, once I get the back spine on and the other piece, the spire or whatever you want to call it, the pointed parts sticking on there, those are going to be weathered and painted a little bit different color too. And then I'll be ready to go ahead and have this all completed so that this will be ready to glue onto the top of the ship. And then I'll have to, of course, get all the wiring done, get the disconnect between the two. So that's ready to go, disconnect on here. But I wanted to get this all completed because I have to have this in place before I finish up all of the rock material around the rest of this mound of rocks. And then put some other rocks down here on the base part, and then go back in with the air dry clay to finish up the main rock structure, and then I can start looking at painting it, weathering it, doing some dry brushing and that kind of thing. So, all right, but coming along very nicely, and I think that's going to work really well. This longer post gives it a lot more stability, and that's in there really solid. Goes through the kit, and then I have 2 layers of thick styrene that it sticks through, and I have it 5-minute epoxied all around it as well. So that's not coming out anytime soon, and it's not really holding on a great deal of weight. This isn't a very heavy model when you get it all together. So, but that'll be good as far as keeping that on there, and it's a nice low profile, so it's not really going to interfere with any of the interior or the wiring and that kind of thing. And all I'm going to do is, once I get all the wires in place, I'll get them wired together to just one set of 2 wires, which will easily fit down through this tube and easily fit down through that brass tube, which goes all the way down through the bottom. So, okay. All right. All right, and here is the completion of adding all of the oven-baked polymer clay onto the foam structure. And I've added some other things like this large rock right here, some smaller ones. I may add a few other things up here. We'll see. It doesn't have to be too cluttered. This is going to have the air dry clay blending it all together. And then I'm going to have other things like the smaller sand and rocks from the scenic model materials. Maybe a little bit of greenery here and there on it, just to give it some added contrast. I think it turned out really well. And of course, I'll fill in all the gaps in between the rocks with the air dry clay as well to bring that all together and make it look like it's all one solid thing. Let me show you the back. All right, here's the back a bit, which you're really not going to see that much, but it is pretty centrally located, so it is going to be visible from the sides. And you have over here, and you have this side. So initially, I had made another piece, which I was going to cover in the rocks and put back here. At this point, I'm not going to do that. There's not enough room, really, and it's not necessary. When I made the foam part, it seemed like some added structure here and there. I don't really need anything back here. Again, this is the back. This is the very back, since the whole thing's going to be displayed as a diamond shape. So you're really not going to see that. I will do the air dry clay and put some other rocks and sand on it, but it's not going to be visible as far as the ship is concerned, or the way it's being displayed from the front. But I'll play with it and see how it's going to work. I'll also put some of the air dry clay around this part to blend it in, and then I'll add some sand material and paint this as well, so it's going to be more blending into the desert look rather than showing the metal. All right, let me go ahead and put the ship onto this and show you how that's going to look on the progress of this so far. All right, so I threw up a little crappy backdrop just so you can get a better look at the ship. So here's the ship mocked up onto the rock base. Of course, like I said, none of this is finished. It's just the application of the polymer rocks, oven-baked clay, onto it. I may add a few extra things we'll see onto the wood part. All of this is going to be covered in air dry clay, It's going to melt it into the rocks and fill in the gaps on the rocks up here as well. And then I'll use some different tools and textures on that to make it look more like rock as well. But I wanted the main structure to look like realistic, detailed rock, and I've succeeded in doing that with the polymer clay rocks. So very, very cool. There's the back. Kind of an overhead shot. As you can see, it's going diagonal. But you're going to look at it from the front. This is how it's going to be arranged, in a diamond shape rather than like this. All right. So the next thing I'll do is start to apply the air dry clay over the remainder. And I'm not going to put it on the sides, just I'm going to put it to the edge. The side I'll probably just paint black. And then the rest of it, I'm going to have that clay on, and then that'll take a few days to harden. And then I'll be able to start doing some painting and some dry brushing and adding some other scenic materials. So, all right. All right, so I've applied all of the air dry clay and let it set up for at least a day, actually closer to 2 days now. A little closer here. And I did it roughly to the edge. I don't need it to be perfect. It's going to have scenic material over it like sand, and I'm going to paint it, of course. This outer edge, I'm just going to paint it probably black or maybe even a brown or something to blend in with the sand-looking material. I also covered all of the major gaps in between the rocks, as you can see. I'm looking at this one, obviously, because I did a lot of that, covering it up. And along the top. Let me turn it around and show you the back. All right, here is the back. And I tried to do some uneven contouring on the ground part, like this bump here. And I used a, see if I can get closer. There you go. I used the rough end of a sponge, rough side of a sponge, a little bit of hair there, in order to put some texture into it. And also in the parts that I put onto the, sorry, focus. The parts that I filled in along the rocks as well. All right, and I know it's hard to see a lot of the texture because it's all basically white with a little bit of different colorations in it. So the next thing I'm going to do is go in and do some pre-shading, like paint some darker colors in the different rock details. But I'm not going to use black. I'll probably just use darker colors like brown or some red or hall red, that kind of thing. I'm looking at some different pictures of desert rocks to kind of get an idea of how I want it to look. And of course, I'll also have some other materials on it too, so, okay. All right, so as I showed in the previous stills, I started doing the painting, did quite a bit of layering and painting onto the display base. The first thing I did was I airbrushed some dark brown and some hall red into all of the the cracks and crevices and even along the other surfaces to do some pre-shading, to give it some dark shades underneath the colors. Then I went back over with some lighter browns, some sand yellow, some various, darker tan tones in order to come up to where I am right now on the base. This isn't how I want it to look, but there is still a lot of the darker tones still within the crevices. But I have it ready to go on to the next step. The trick with this is knowing when to stop. Obviously, I made it lighter than it was initially, but you don't want to make it so that it all comes back to one monotone, tan look or sand look. You want it to stay darker in the crevices. I may have to do some adjustment back and forth and put some more into the cracks, even some oil washes and things like that. But what I want to do right now is I'm going to go on to doing some dry brushing to bring out some of the surface detail, but to leave the darker underneath. This isn't the ultimate color I want this all to be. I want this to be a lighter sandy tan kind of a color when we're done. And then, of course, there's going to be some sand material put onto it, onto the actual ground parts, and even a little bit up and through these as well. So what I did first was I put on a gloss coat. I sprayed on a gloss coat over top of the entire thing. You can see that it's shiny. Two reasons. One, I wanted to seal in the paint because I didn't want it pulling off when I do the dry brushing, but also because when I'm going to use a wash, it's not going to work right on a flat paint. It's just going to soak right into it. So I wanted that to be sealed in. And later on, once I'm done and doing the dry brushing and everything else, I can go over it with a flat coat again to bring it down to where I need it to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be using a new product that Augie Gonzalez from Interstellar Modeler had reviewed on his channel called Artify. And these are specifically designed to do dry brushing. Really cool. I really like that it's a snub-nosed, large brush, very soft, very well made, in order to just do dry brushing. So there's 5 brushes, obviously from larger down to smaller. And then he had recommended in his video that you don't want to be using a paper towel because it takes all the moisture out of the brush, and you want to keep that in there. What you want to use is some kind of piece of foam. They had a set that came with a little jar that had foam in it. It also had some soap to clean the brush. So I just got the one with the brushes. So I'm just going to use this foam and this other packing foam that I have that I can use as well to avoid, just to remove the excess paint, to avoid taking the moisture out of the paint or out of the brush itself. You want to keep the paint and the moisture in the brush. So what I want to do is I'm going to start with the larger brush, and I'm going to go over it with some different lighter color tan paints, or even white in some cases, maybe some grays on the rocks, that kind of thing, to get another layer of detail coming out of this. The trick to any of this to look natural is layer, 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 lots of layers of different things. So like right now, it kind of looks like a homogeneous color, but it really isn't. If you look more closely, there's still a lot of darkened panels within the cracks of the rocks that are going to stand out even more once I start putting the lighter paints over top of it. I didn't want to start with a black because I don't really want this to be that much of a contrast. It's still ultimately a sand-colored rock in the desert, but it does have some slight variations that your eyes are going to pick out from the darker colors. So, all right. So let me start working on that, and I'll kind of show you the progress as I go. All right, so work progresses on the dry brushing on the rocks. It's kind of hard to see in the lighting, but here's the back of it. I like how there's some definite variation between the darker sections that stay dark and the lighter. And I've used several different colors on this, including some yellow, straight up yellow, some brown, some, what else did I use? A little bit of white. So I used some medium yellow, some flat brown, which is a lighter brown, some white, a little bit of beige. I'm just kind of experimenting. So the key to this is patience. You've got to have a lot of patience. It's not going to come together just, you know, one dry brushing. You've got to do different sections, different parts, add on some lighter colors, then maybe that doesn't quite work, so you take it down a bit, you darken it a bit. I like how this back is looking. It looks like real rock. And again, it's not done yet. Let me turn it around and show you the front. All right, and there's the front. I'm using these little disposable cups, and I switched over to this piece of rough packaging foam. I think the key to this is that you want something that's rough, that sort of mimics the surface, as you can see, but it's not wet. It's not a paper towel. It's not soaking up the paint. It's simply taking off the surface so that you have it down inside the brush. And this brush keeps this paint in here for quite a long time. So when you think that you still don't have paint in it, it's still doing it. It's still got little traces of it. Actually, I just cleaned this up here. So what I want to do is maybe try one of the smaller brushes. I'm going to go back in and darken some of these cracks up a bit in this rock. Maybe some of the ones up here a bit before I go any further. That's where you get your variation of the color, is when you have the really darkened parts in the crevices, and then it gets lighter as you go further out. So, all right. So I did a lot more the dry brushing. I used the smaller brush to get back in and put in some of the darker sections in the crevices of the rocks. You can see, like right here. Once I did that over the whole thing, and I darkened up some sections again, I went back over and did some progressively lighter colors on the main surfaces to bring those back up, to give you a contrast. I won't go over all the different colors I used, but several different shades of like sand and beige and even some white to bring it back up. Also did it on the surface to give that some random color. Definitely looking like some realistic rock. All right, let me go ahead and turn it around and show you the back. All right, there you go. So it's definitely tricky because you do want, overall, if you look at, you know, rocks in the desert and things like that, they do kind of look from a distance as a one homogeneous color, just like a sand color. But in reality, there's a lot of different colors within it. Like you can see some really dark veins, some reddish, some orangish, you know, the darker different colors built inside of it. When you pull back a bit, you see like an overall sandy color. So right now, I think I've got it to the point where I really like the way it's looking. So what I'm going to go ahead and do now is I'm going to put a flat coat on it to cover up any more of the shiny parts of it and to just seal everything in. Bring it back to a dull coat. And then I'll see where it stands. I mean, I can certainly do a little bit of tweaking here and there. But I definitely like how it's turning out. Let me pull it back in the front again. I tilted it up so I can get more of the light onto the rocks. You can see all the variations. And that's what gives it the realistic look, is that there's a whole lot of different colors in there. And then ultimately, as I build up the different shades and the darker colors into the crevices, I keep adding lighter colors to the peaks and the surfaces. So ultimately at the end I ended up with white, just kind of going over the sand colors just to give it more of a lighter color. But you can see like here, there's still a lot of glossiness like on that rock. So I want to bring that back to a flat coat. And then that way I can see where it stands. And a lot of this too, like the rock and the sand, obviously, I'm going to have some sand material over top of it. So, okay, looking pretty cool. All right, so I put a dull coat over the whole thing and let that dry overnight. So I took it back to a flat finish. And then I used some of these weathering powders, desert sand. I get this from my local hobby shop. I'm not sure where it's from. Well, St. Cloud, Minnesota, that's where it's from. But he gets these in. I've used them before. They're pretty good pigments. And I just use like a cheap brush to brush them onto the surface. I had to go pretty light with it because if I go too much, it's just gonna take over all of it. But definitely brought it up to a more sand color. Let me try to tilt it up here. Hold on one second. All right, there we go. Tilted it up so I can get the light on it. So I wanted to end up with this powdery coat because it gives it that dusty, sandy look. But yet you can still see the rock and the different colors that are within the rock. But it brought it up to more of a sand color. It's a lot more in the yellow range on the camera. It's more of a sand color, a tan color. In real life, it's not quite that bright as it looks on the camera. If I filmed this in normal daylight, which it's dark right now, you'd be able to see it a little better. But it definitely brought it up to more of the sand look that I'm going for. But it also kind of gives it that dry look because it is a desert and it is sandy. Like you can see right there. Kind of looks like traces of sand blown over the wind-blown rocks. All right. And the base right now, again, it's looking really yellow in the camera, but it's more of a sand color. And I'm going to have sand material over top of that, most of that. So that's gonna make that look more realistic. But I think I've reached the point now where I want to just kind of keep it here and then start working on some of the other material, like the scenic sand, some smaller rocks, a little bit of shrubbery, maybe some grass tufts sticking out from some of the rock crevices. Let me show you the back of it as well. All right, here's the back. And the same thing, it must just be the light that I'm using, but it is nowhere near this yellow in real life. It's more of a medium sand color, like a tan color. And a whole lot of the color in the rocks is maintained as well. So it gives it an overall look of how I want it to be. The key to it in reaching the point where I'm happy with it is basically if you look back from a distance, it looks like one color. Which a lot of times if you look at a big, rock formation from a distance, it looks like one color. When you get closer, obviously you see the variations and the various different colors and things that make it up. That's what makes it natural to your eye. Same thing here. So when you're further away, it just looks like it's all one color. When you get closer, of course, you can see that it's not. It's all different light and dark shades. Plus, like I said, some of that powder settled in to look like sand dust in the crevices of the rocks. Definitely giving it that idea that this is a big rock formation out in the desert that's getting blown by winds constantly and sand over top of it. So, all right, so I applied some scenic sand material. There's different brands out there. I get this from Hobby Lobby. It's very, very fine. It's almost like a powder, so it gives it a more realistic sand look, but it gives it a gritty look rather than using just regular actual sand, which would be a large grit. They also make other things like this gravel, which I might apply a little bit to. They also have some larger rocks like this, which I'm going to glue some down with as well. And what you use for this, it's called Scenic Cement, and I get this from Woodland Scenics. It's a very thin PVA glue. What I do, and it dries matte, which is really nice. So I have this bottle, which was a lens cleaner, and I cleaned it out. I can use it in here fairly well because it is very thin. So I'll put some in here, and I'll just use this. There's still a bit of water in there. I'll just use it to spray it on. You sprinkle the sand, sprinkle some more, spray some on it, and then this sticks to it. And I've let this sit overnight, and it's nice and dry. And you can see, if you look closer, I didn't totally coat it. I just put some over it to give it the idea of sand. Some areas, like down here, I did a little more liberally around the rocks and around this big rock to seal in. The part that you could see was surrounded by the air dry clay. The rest of it I just sprinkled over it. All right, so it definitely took down some of the variations in the different colors. There certainly is still some there, but it's a lot more of the sand color that I want it to be. Then after I let it dry overnight, I went back over it. I airbrushed, misted lightly over it with some of this beige from Vallejo Air, Model Air. And I also did it along the edge. It's kind of hard to cover that wood look, but we'll see. I might do some more later. But I wanted it to be kind of all uniform for now. So what I'm going to do now, before I go in and do anything else, is I want to put down some other scenic material like these rocks, maybe some of the gravel. And I want to use my static grass applicator to put on some of this very fine 2mm medium green grass. So what I'll do is use this static tack, which is a thicker glue, also dries matte. So what I'll do is, I don't want grass everywhere, of course, but I do want a little bit of patches of grass. So what I'll do is put down a little bit here, a little bit there, some different places. Then you shake this static grass applicator over top of it while you're holding a little lead, and it makes the grass stand up. And then once you're done, you just shake it off and get the rest of the grass off of it. I can put some patches up in here, put some around the different spots, just to add a little bit of color. And I can also use this static tack to glue down this. Since it's a thicker glue, it'll adhere these larger rocks into little pieces around here too. Might have a few patches of grass like around in here also. All right, once I get that on there and then that dries overnight again, I can look at maybe touching it up some more with just a little bit of highlighting some of the darker crevices. I can even use like some oils if I want to, but really when you get closer, like I was explaining, you still see the variations in the color. It's just that now the rock looks very sandy, so it gives it more of that kind of a sandstone look to it. But there's definitely still a lot of dark spots within the crevices and everything like that on the back as well. Get around there and show you. Yeah. All right. So definitely getting this honed into where I want it to be. But I wanted it to be a lighter sand color in the end. But I can always adapt some of that. So, okay, let me go ahead and add on the static grass and some of the rocks, and then we'll take a look at that. All right, so I added a lot of scenic material. After I put on the static grass and the other rocks and things, it was certainly closer to what I wanted it to be, but the grass itself didn't look properly in scale. So I went back in and I used some other material, which is kind of see if I can get a good picture of it. It's kind of a fuzzy, you can see it there. It almost looks like a bush now. And I glued some over top of the really green grass that was there. And it blends in more nicely with the sand look. I also put down some more of the gravel to give it some different variations in color in the sand. I went over the base a little more. I just brushed on some dark earth, and then I went back and airbrushed some lighter colors onto it to kind of cover a little better, but I'm not overly worried about the wood part. I just wanted it to blend into it. I had forgot to mention too, earlier on when I was doing the sand, I put glue on this and I sprinkled sand over that, and that's dried up. That's dried, so this will help to hide that when the model's on it. I left the part metallic that it slides over, and then the aluminum part that slides over it, once I paint the bottom of the ship, I'll paint that as well. I mean, I'll glue that, put some glue and some sand on the outside of that as well, so it'll blend in with this. So when the ship's on, it'll a little bit hide that metallic tube. But I think that looks fantastic. We're getting some natural light coming in on it, so it gives it more of a realistic look. All right, let me go ahead and turn that and show you the other sides of it. Okay, so here's the side, and you can see that shrubbery there. So some of the grass is still sticking out around it. It's all unkempt. Obviously, there wouldn't be some really nice grass fields in this desert of Tatooine. So I like that look better, and it gives some various shading. I think that turned out really well. Just looks like some scrub brush clinging to the rocks. All right, let me go ahead and show you the back. All right, here's the back. Same thing down there. Very cool. And you can see, like I said, when I'm close up, there's a lot of different colorations within the rocks, quite a bit. But I didn't want it to be stark. I wanted it to be subtle so that it gives your eye that image that it's natural. That's the way real rocks are. Typically, if they're all in the same area, like a big outcropping of rock like this, it's in one area, so it's getting the same weathering, it's getting the same rain and whatever. But some of it would be discolored, some of it would be different colors, but only when you got close up to it. When you were further away, you wouldn't really see that. So, all right, let me show you the other side. All right, and then here's the right side if you're looking from the front. Some more of that shrubbery. All right, very cool. All right, let me go ahead and put the ship on it, and then that'll wrap up this video for the base. All right, so very, very cool. I really like the contrast between the silver metallics and the sand color. I think that really looks cool. Obviously, we see a lot of that since they love their sand planets in Star Wars. And this did start on Tatooine and then went to other planets as well. So very, very cool. And you can see, like I was talking about the support, it kind of blends in somewhat. But when you look at it, you're going to be looking at it straight on. You're not really going to notice that. It just looks like it's flying over this rock formation. Very, very cool. All right. And you'll be able to see all of the main parts. You'll be able to see the lights in the engines, the lights in the front, obviously the cockpit, the figures, little Grogu. You'll be able to see the back engine, which will be glowing blue. So that'll be nicely visible. And it's in an action pose, so it's on a bit of an angle towards us, which I think is pretty sweet. So, okay. All right. Well, that's going to wrap up the base for now. I may do a little bit of tweaking down the road when I finish this model up. Just one more video to finish up the ship. Most of the ship is done. I have to paint underneath, of course, the bottom. I have to paint these other parts. You have to put this together in a certain way. So this has to go on before you put the bottom on, and then there's other parts that glue onto this. So I'll get this glued together and painted and weathered and whatever, and that'll be glued onto the ship before I put the bottom on. The bottom will be glued in place, and then I need to run all the wires together, run them down the tube to the bottom with the battery, fasten a switch, and then the other accessories. There are some guns on the front that need to be painted. The engine is, this little carburetor looking thing is mostly painted, but I still have to do some of the weathering on the inner parts that you can see through the ship. I have to paint the figures, of course. Mando in the cockpit, Grogu up in the bubble. I have to do some painting around the trim of the cockpit canopy. So still quite a few things to do, but it's definitely coming down to the wire. So I will finish this up in the next video and have this all completed. All right, really happy with my diorama base. Really happy with how that turned out. I think that's going to look fantastic and be a really good display for the N1 Starfighter. So I will be finishing that up on the next video. A little bit more work to do, as I said. I'll be focusing on that and getting it done, and then do a final reveal when I do the next video for this build. So, all right. Well, thank you to all my new subscribers, and stay tuned.